Hello and welcome to the program. This is the Russian invasion segment. I'm Ladi Akiridulwale. We begin in Russia, where Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has paid a visit to Mariupol, the city in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region, captured by Russian forces last year after a months-long siege. According to the Defense Ministry, General Shoigu paid a rare visit to Russia's forces that is deployed in Ukraine, awarding medals to military personnel and meeting senior commanders during the trip as well. The meeting discussed issues of providing troops with weapons, military equipment, and ammunition, as well as issues of combat training of reserve units. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz held talks focused largely on the war in Ukraine, China, and other matters, amid signs of some strain between the transatlantic partners. Sitting next to Mr. Scholz in the Oval Office, Mr. Biden thanked the German leader for his profound support on Ukraine. Mr. Biden hailed Mr. Scholz's decision to increase military spending and had worked hard in lockstep with the United States and other allies to support Ukraine.
You help Ukraine meet its basic needs like food, health, heating, and you continue to give them input. And I want to thank you, Olaf, for your strong and steady leadership. I mean that sincerely. It's made a world of difference. And together, we made good on our promise. You stepped up to provide critical military support. And, you know, I would argue that beyond your military support, the moral support you gave to the Ukrainians has been profound. It's been profound.
And it's really important that we acted together, that we organized our lockstep, and that we made it feasible that we can give the necessary support to Ukraine during all this time. And at this time, I think it is very important that we give the message that we will continue to do so as long as it takes and as long as it is necessary, and that we are ready also for staying with the Ukrainians as long as it is necessary.
I promise you.
Staying in the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says that closer relations with Russia will complicate Beijing's ties to Europe. Ms. Jean-Pierre's comments come as the U.S. sounds out close allies about the possibility of imposing sanctions on China if Beijing provides military support to Russia for its war in Ukraine. Neither Washington nor Berlin or any of the other partners says they have seen evidence of Beijing's provision of such weapons to Moscow, but U.S. officials say they are monitoring the situation closely.
The president was in Ukraine, and he was also in Poland. There's constant communication with our allies that the president is having. They're not one-offs here. They are consistent and they are continuous. And so I just want to be very clear there. And look, you know, we have said this over and over again. We have not, we have not seen any. We haven't seen China do anything yet as it relates to lethal weapons, and we believe that Russia's war in Ukraine has put China in a difficult position to actually move forward in that direction. Every step China takes towards Russia makes it harder for China with Europe and other countries around the world. But want to be really clear on that piece. But as I've mentioned before, Secretary Blinken met with Wang Yi just recently in Munich and made himself really clear. They had a very clear conversation, and keeping that communication, that line of communication open is very important to us as well. But again, we haven't seen China take that action yet, but we've been very clear and had conversations with China.
And Latvian President Egils Levits visited the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, where he met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Both presidents, accompanied by their wives, visited the cemetery of the defenders in Lviv and lit flowers in a tribute to fallen Ukrainian service members. Mr. Zelensky expressed gratitude for the decisiveness of Latvian support. Latvia has been one of the most active supporters of Ukraine during its year-long war with Russia, providing more than 370 million euros worth of military equipment and other euros in humanitarian aid.
not only sanctions, but also accountability. And I will advocate for the establishment of an ad hoc international tribunal, since no other international court can currently try the crime of aggression. Of course, International Criminal Court is doing important work by gathering evidence of individual war crimes. But it is necessary also to try the crime of aggression, which is a leadership crime. And unfortunately, there is a crime in international law, but till now there is no international court which would be responsible to deal with this issue, to try this criminal.
Egil Levits, president of Latvia. Hundreds of Austrians gathered and marched on the streets of Vienna to protest against weapons deliveries to Ukraine and call for neutrality of Austria. The protesters gathered at Hofburg, a center of Vienna, waved banners and shouted slogans against the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and EU weapons deliveries. Since maintaining neutrality is Austria's usual practice, many Austrians have voiced their opposition to being involved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and following EU to deliver weapons.
Austria is neutral, and we want to stay neutral because we don't want to be involved in any war. But being a part of the European Union, we are forced to support whatever European Union decides. So if they decide to deliver weapons, they deliver weapons. And we think delivering weapons can never bring peace. We have enough escalation, and we also have to say how many wars America is responsible for. So all the war is starting with the Americans because it's a business for them. Selling weapons is a business.
It's broken out among Georgian lawmakers as a parliamentary committee debated a bill on foreign agents, which critics say is modeled on draconian legislation in neighboring Russia. Video from inside the parliament building in the capital, Tbilisi, showed a brief but violent brawl between lawmakers after the chairman of the chamber's Legal Affairs Committee appeared to strike the leader of the United National Movement opposition party, which opposes the bill. The governing Georgian Dream Bloc last month announced that it supported the legislation, which still needs to pass other approval stages before it can become law. Critics have compared it to a 2012 Russian law, which has been steadily expanded since then and used to crack down on Russian civil society and independent media. They have cast the law as symbolic of an authoritarian shift in Georgia.
This law we see as a disaster for Georgia because this is how it has started in Russia, and this is where our government is leading us to. This law is a serious impediment to Georgia's European future, and it comes in the moment when Georgia is expecting candidacy status, and these people are angry. They don't want to be called agents because they serve their country in their good faith.
This law, which targets civil society, is just a part of the bigger picture, bigger anatomy of the treason. When we have a regime which sees the West and the free world as their enemy and tries to cultivate this Putinist idea in a society and betrays the future of Georgia. That's why we're here, to protest that and to deliver the message to the society that our future needs this government to be changed.
The informal ruler of our country, Bidzina Ivanishvili, and his ruling party, Georgian Dream, is sabotaging our Euro-Atlantic integration, and the Russian legislature, which now is proposed in parliament, is against Georgia's national interests, against our European aspirations, and whole international community and Georgian community is agreed on this topic.
Let's talk now to Voice of America correspondent Anna Chenikova, who joins us from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Hi, Anna. Nice to see you.
Hello. Good evening.
Let's start off from what we were just seeing a couple of minutes ago, the visit of the Latvian president to Ukraine. Now, Latvia has been, as we've reported, a very strong supporter of Ukraine, but now it's going a step further in calling for some kind of mechanism to tackle war crimes. Of course, this is coming on the heels of the War Crimes Summit, which Ukraine itself is hosting, which took place over the weekend. How much traction do you think this has gained?
Well, it's definitely extremely important, and support of Eastern European countries, particularly because, of course, Eastern European countries are much closer to the epicenter of this war, and they understand. Well, they feel that they could be next, and this could have been happening. At their land as well. So this is definitely extremely important for Ukraine. And this step, the next step, is as well one of the main goals for Ukraine to establish this war crime procedure, because well, unfortunately, so many areas in Ukraine has been already destroyed. So many people have already suffered. And so many war crimes, international community, international experts have already seen and have already reported in liberated areas of Ukraine. So this war crimes investigations and war crimes judgments is definitely one of the most important questions that has already started. So this procedure has already began, and for Ukraine it's important, and President Zelensky mentioned that a couple of times already, that so despite the priority for all the military activities at this point of time and all the possible future peace talks, war crimes and investigation and judgment of the war crimes would be one of the most important points in that procedure. So and this is really important for Ukraine, particularly to begin this process. So this is definitely a great step to start with.
I'm sure the Ukrainians would be to some extent disappointed by some of the countries that are expressing either neutrality or want to stay out of the conflict. One of them is Austria, where you saw some demonstrations there saying that, you know, Austria has ever since the end of World War II, maintained neutrality in conflicts, but that, you know, being a member of the EU means that it's obliged to follow EU rules, and that, you know, quite a number of them don't want that because they don't want to be involved. Now, just using Austria as an example, but there are a couple of other countries, Switzerland and one or two others like that, whose foundations are based on neutrality. How much impact do you think their non-participation may have on facts on the ground, especially within the EU and sometimes within NATO, for those who are members of NATO, in terms of unity of purpose against the Russian invasion?
Well, definitely Ukraine, well, wants and expects as much countries to support Ukraine at this stage and in general as possible. And of course, some countries, as you mentioned, who demonstrate this neutrality, well, we hear a lot about some, you know, something like humanitarian support that, for example, Switzerland was considering despite its neutrality status. And similarly, some other countries who, at the beginning particularly, started with humanitarian support, and then it evolved with time. So definitely the numbers of these neutral countries is much less than those who demonstrate and show with their actions the support for Ukraine. But of course, for Ukraine, is definitely, and not only for Ukraine, at this point of time, for the whole Europe, is important to have this united position, because for Europe, so the threat for Europe is as big as it was never before. So this war demonstrated that, well, Ukraine, if Ukraine falls, let's put it this way, Europe would be next. And for such countries as Switzerland and Austria, this war is a little bit further away than, for instance, for such countries as Latvia, Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, or Finland, right? So, and we can see also, and we can hear, and we can see the difference in the perception of this war, and the difference in the level of support and level of public, especially support and public, public actions by the countries. So I think that like from Ukrainian perspective, of course, Ukraine wants and expects and hopes for as many countries, for the support of as many countries as possible. But some countries, it's definitely that President Zelensky and also Ukrainian diplomacy is working with all the countries and communicating with all the countries. And it might be that some actions between, let's say, neutral countries, let's put it this way, are happening behind the scenes or not in the public eye. It also could be, you know, the case. But again, of course, it's nothing to involve like weapon support or anything like that. So it shouldn't be, you know, a great, let's say, let's put it this way, it shouldn't be a great, you know, a challenge for Ukraine to have some countries who remain neutral. They're definitely not, you know, supporting Russian position and not supporting the invasion. This is for sure. But this neutral position, well, there are certain political and you know, historical, let's say, points that probably affect that. But again, we don't know exactly what's happening behind the scene and what's happening in the communication of the top level politicians, because these communications are taking place, and President Zelensky is very active in such communications, not only him, but also his team, and particularly diplomacy sector of the Ukrainian government politics. So, but again, of course, Ukraine hopes that this neutrality will be kind of, you know, put away, and that Europe will have this united and strong position.
Indeed. Anna Chenikova, thank you as always for bringing us up to speed on the situation on the ground and for the perspectives that are governing the various parties. Thank you.
Thank you.